6 of us here. I assume Mike will be here shortly, but I don't know.
He said earlier today he wasn't 100% sure.
Yeah. Mike moved this weekend, so he might still be unpacking boxes to a different, not that far. Maybe he moved a mile.
Right.
He's at Sugar Hill now.
Nice.
Yeah, maybe as the crow flies. It's
Jeff, have you moved in?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Soon.
Oh, do you do a swap-a-roo?
Yeah.
The traditional.
Housing courtesy of the Conservation Commission.
There it is. See, membership has its privileges. If anyone needs.
Where are you headed?
Well, where Mike is moving out of, so Spruce Mountain Lodge.
Okay.
Be neighbors with Tom.
Yeah.
Where's Mike?
Just down the road. I think it's Sugar Hill.
Sugar Hill.
Oh, Sugar.
Yeah, he's neighbors with Meredith now, the Piotros.
And which house did they move into?
It's at the very end, straight ahead.
Oh, yeah.
To the left of Meredith's house.
Yes.
Yeah. I forget that guy's name. He was quiet. He was kind of. I just knew him as a guy. I used to live in Sugar Hill Lane for years. He was just a guy that drove a Toyota pickup. That's how I met him. We've got minutes.
Yes.
For anyone who needs them.
Thank you.
Yes, we've got minutes. Shall we start with the minutes? Hey, Mike.
Hi, Mike.
Speaking of,
I just said you might be late because you might be unpacking boxes.
I have been unpacking bags.
This you have to go far.
Tom, I have two editorials and maybe a suggestion of meeting minutes. On the second page,
You're fast.
well, I read them before I come.
You're just coming prepared. All right.
It says reduce carbon pollution. That should be carbon.
Oh, yeah.
And on the third page, it's at the end of the first.
They're printed at different spacings.
Okay, it is on the second paragraph toward the third or fourth sentence from the end of the second paragraph.
So it's.
I can give you this.
Oh, this is when I left early. That's right.
I'm assuming I'm looking at the right version here. Bruce continued.
Guess we can agree any kind of pollution might be bad. Carbon or carbon.
Anyways, it's a typo, it's not very significant.
Yeah.
What was it? Cashback. Am I reading something that was earlier?
Could be.
Unless there was two.
While he's looking for that one, I have.
Right here.
Oh, good.
It is.
I would say the good thing is Susan doing
I
it.
guess we should just.
I have a substantive one.
All
On
right.
page 3, it says 6 Conservation Commission members voted for and 2 abstained.
Yeah,
And we only have 7 members.
I agree.
So I should like to make a change to reflect that only 1 abstained.
Yes, that makes sense.
And then actually in the following sentence, again, there's a typo. Tom wrapped up with a bit of history. HTAT, it should be
Oh, yeah.
THAT. And I don't know how others feel, but I know my neighbor said to me after they read through this, they couldn't understand what they just read. And, you know, there's kind of 2 ways to take meeting minutes. One is to try to take down what everybody said, and the other is to put down essentially the gist of what was said without trying to translate everything. And obviously what we're having here is the meeting minutes are being, you know, they're trying to just transcribe off of the text, and it gets convoluted. And I would suggest that we recommend that the secretary try to, you know, distill this down to, you know, there was a discussion on this, and this is the decision that was made as opposed to trying to write everything that was said in the discussion. I don't know how others feel, but that's my...
Agreed, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be kind of just bullet points and conversation
Yeah.
pieces, which,
People don't like that.
well,
They want sentences.
yeah, but then they should listen to what's
Yeah.
recorded.
Well, it also used to be us taking our minutes, so I think as we were engaged in the conversation and trying to take minutes, they were by
Brief.
default super, super brief.
Yeah, I think you can summarize it in sentences as opposed to bullet points, but I just, as I said, my neighbor said to me, I read through these and I don't know what, it was so convoluted, I couldn't figure out what was...
Right.
Yeah,
It can go that way.
the process I use for the planning board is that I have the recorder provide me with notes as he thinks it ought to be presented, and then I modify it. And, within for example, we just changed over recording. Betsy used to do it, and Hardy, and she used to do it exactly correctly because she's been doing it for a lot of years. New kid came on board, and Will was trying to do one of these, and it was like, no, don't want that. And it took about maybe three times of him taking notes before he got the right flavor and mix kind of thing. So.
Well, I have it, but.
And if somebody wants the full official record, it's been filmed.
Yeah.
Right.
And we could go back to having either be the chair. I mean, that's how, for a long time, Larry, like when Larry was the chair, he always went through the minutes, which I kind of stepped away from because I didn't want to be viewed as moving the minutes in any one way
Right.
or the other. But we could have either the chair do that again or have a board secretary who's the one who receives them and does the same thing. And I don't think it matters. I don't think we're moving. I don't think there's that many large projects to be moved one way or the other.
I mean, it's great that Susan does it. Maybe she wants to continue doing it and just do it now.
Yeah.
Is she doing it at a cost to us? Or?
Yes.
Oh, she is. I didn't know that.
Yeah, she's doing it at cost to us. It's the same, I should know this, but I don't. It's the same rate that minute takers for other boards are.
It's $75. Is it that much?
$25 an hour.
Yeah. She's essentially, it's been 1 hour per meeting, regardless of whether she's here or here, so she can try to. Yeah, I can definitely talk. And I figured.
I don't know what the consensus of the other members are, but that's...
Well, I don't want to do it a million times.
And it was also just a reflection of what I was getting as feedback.
Yeah, no, that's good to know. You want people to
Yeah.
be engaged.
And listen, I've had other people tell me the only thing you have to put in minutes is the vote, like, what the resolution was and what the vote was. I mean, that's the minimal minutes you would take.
The usual requirements are you have to say who attended.
Yeah.
That you record any votes for example, approval of minutes and from prior meetings, and then any votes within the meeting when you adjourn. Those are mandatory requirements. Everything else is blocked.
Well, the nice thing is though, is the next, a month later, you can look at the minutes and say, oh yeah, and then just kind of pick up from that, which I think is really helpful. But it doesn't have to be, like you said, as much detail, because this is really good detail. It's in transcription, but we probably don't need it all. Like you said, and if it's inhibiting people from reading and understanding, then we can do better.
Yeah, it's also a lot of times there's conversation, Ken said, Bill said, so-and-so said, and then you start to change as you learn more information, but it gets, in the end, I think it's...
Discussion ensued.
Yeah. And so I'm not saying that it should be just simple, a vote was taken and this is what the vote was, but this is sort of on the other end of...
I think somewhere in between would be ideal.
And I was also told we couldn't necessarily identify the members as who said what and that sort of thing, because then you'll get in trouble.
Yeah, for a little while we went to that. For a little while, there's maybe like a year or a month, or I don't know. A couple of meetings took place where we did that. We just had members stated or.
Yeah.
Right, but you could still go on and watch it.
Yeah.
It was him.
I think I'm mostly happy that you.
Which member was that?
I was surprised.
I didn't think anyone did.
But I had glanced at the meeting minutes and I said, I can understand where it's
I know,
coming from.
I have someone I know who reads them too.
All right. Let's continue the conversation after we finish with the minutes, if you don't mind. Any other changes besides, we've got 2 typos so far, 1 changing, then 1, the 2 to 1, the correct total.
A motion to accept the minutes.
As amended.
As amended, of course.
Second.
All in favor of accepting the minutes as amended? Great.
Aye.
Thank you.
That was 7 in favor.
Yes. And let's start, I guess, with that, kind of continue that discussion about, I guess, how, the how, and the who a little bit. So is it next month, I believe, the appointments change? Is it right with the town meeting? So there's 3 of you that are up for reappointment. So if you want to be reappointed to the board and you have not already submitted your letters to the select board asking for reappointment, now is your time. I know that there's already been a couple, I think, public postings for open seats.
When do you know when we have to get it in by?
I would say as soon as possible.
As soon as
but I assume by town, I assume it's the new
Like, you
select
can
board.
stick it under the door.
And put it in the door?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I assume-
I was having some internal debate as to whether or not I was going to, but I think I will.
On your way out, just stick it under the door. That's all
Yeah.
you're doing.
It's just a letter saying, I want to sign back up, right? And I've done it before.
Yeah, and I assume it's the new select board that accepts the letter, so yeah, it'll, after town meeting or after our vote is
Right, yeah.
when it needs to, that's the real deadline.
Okay.
And then at that point, we could ask Susan to come to that meeting, maybe talk about the minutes, or I could talk a little bit too. And we have to elect our officers again at that first meeting after it.
Are you aware of any additional folks who have shown interest, or?
No, I'm not. I know there was, when Ken applied last year and was appointed to the board, there was one other individual who was interested. So I don't know, I haven't heard if that individual has shown interest again or not. Yeah, and we're gonna elect officers, and I was hoping at that point to hand the baton to someone, if that's possible, which we don't have to decide now, obviously, but once we're all reappointed. Looking around at everyone, but anyway, we can discuss that.
Yeah, again, the standard there is, and the planning board, when we meet in March, we'll establish a nominating committee. And for officers, and then April would be the installation vote.
That is more formal than we have done. Normally at the April
Well,
meeting.
no,
we
that's
just-
what's required.
It's required at that one.
That's what the RSA says we're supposed to do,
For the planning board.
yeah, for a planning board. And it's the same rules, actually, for all the appointed boards.
How can you appoint before the new appointees?
Pardon?
You can have a nominating committee before the new appointees? Or
No, we have to wait until after the
town meeting?
town meeting.
So our next meeting, that'll be that.
And the nominating committee established, but the folks who are, for example, I have 2 people who are up this year. And they're there, if they put in letters of interest, which I believe they have, or anybody else who's put in letters of interest, the Board of Selectmen are responsible for making a decision prior to our April meeting.
Oh, for the new members?
Yeah,
Yes.
for the members that are up. Or they may choose to appoint new people and not appoint people who've been.
Yes.
Bill, help me out here, but if we meet in the first Monday in March, which will be before the vote is taken,
Right,
then we would establish the nominating committee at our April meeting. And it would then not be until May,
that you'd have the new officers, yeah.
so it'd be April and May,
Yeah,
not March and April, just.
yeah, simply because of
Yeah.
the earliness of the meeting we had.
I would say, but de facto, we've had all 7 people be the nominating committee, and it's been a 2-minute conversation in the past.
Yeah.
So I guess I would say that we carry on with all 7 being the nominating committee unless there's something
Yeah.
missing. 4 officers.
Time for that vice chair to ascend.
Yeah. Good luck.
Yeah, and given like maybe that we would want to have the secretary role come back as a board member who is the one tasked with corresponding with the person actually taking the minutes.
I have no interest in chair.
Yeah, I'm sure you are quite busy.
Put that right up front, right? I have no interest.
All right, so on
That's what I
to
said about the planning board.
Prospect Farm. Yeah, it's on to Prospect Farm.
Aren't you-
So we have one immediate goal for Prospect Farm by the end of the meeting, which is to complete, well, we don't have to complete today, but at least we have a landowner goal assessment form from Forest Land Improvement for their contract for Prospect Farm, which I think we can kind of get to maybe after our other discussion. And also the bill for all of this too, which we had already voted on at the last meeting. So it's $3,000. Ken and his research discovered that there's what is the name of it? A Baker Fund?
Well, yeah, there are actually 4 different sources of funds for the commission that I can understand. One is the money that the town allocates. And I don't know who was at the last selectmen meeting. I was a little uncomfortable with what happened, but Dick had said that we had agreed to zero fund the $2,000 and that we had agreed to take it out of the so-called conservation fund. And I said, I don't think that we ever, and the meeting minutes don't reflect that we didn't
Yeah.
agree to that.
I think it was suggested at the
It
time.
was
Yeah.
suggested we didn't.
Yeah, and we never voted on that. And the conservation fund is actually derived from when somebody takes land out of current use, and 50% of that goes to the town and 50% went to the Conservation Commission. The intention of that fund is for protecting other lands, etc., not to fund the year-to-year. So the selectmen in the end bumped our recommended from 2,000 to 1,500, which is probably not a big deal. Then there is the Baker Fund, which has 63,000 in it, and there is a Wildcat Fund. And when I was talking with Julie, she said, I guess Larry Siebert used to draw from that when we were doing some of the work over on the Wildcat. So there's the Wildcat Fund, there is the Baker Fund, there's the Conservation Fund, and then there is what the town allocates to this commission, which to me is for like paying for the secretary, and if we want a legal advice or whatever, that's the purpose of that. But I would recommend that if we're okaying this, that it comes not out of the 1,500, it should actually come out of the Baker Fund. And the Baker Fund was established way back. And I don't have the full history of that, but Julie did give to me, because I knew that there were various funds out there. Okay. The Wentworth Wildcat Fund is, and this is just based on the short history, but I've learned as I went through the Prospect Farm, sometimes you want to go back and check the validity of the history that's presented. But it just basically says the Board of Selectmen per probate documents instructions, and I believe that 10,000 donated income only for the care and preservation of Jackson Falls and the land adjacent thereto, and on the northerly side of the river from the upper falls to the bridge over the Glen Ellis River, including existing and new benches, trees, banks, or fields. Principle to remain forever intact. And that was in 1981. That was the main probate document, the Hastings Law Firm. There's 23,000 in that fund.
But you can't
That's
take
just the
10 of it.
income.
But there's 10 that you can't take, so there's 13,000 available. So the work that we're doing up there most likely should be coming out of this fund.
Is that the one that we had applied for when we did the
Yes.
first initial work at the falls? And there was like a
It's how we paid for the, most recently,
For the fence.
for the fence.
Fence,
And I
yeah,
know
that's
that
right.
process
Yeah.
was you have to make a written application with pretty detailed description to the trustees of trust funds. So in practice, I think we had kind of gone for big ticket items to be
Yeah.
applied for from that Wildcat fund, like the fence, which I forget what the total value was. And then had taken things like seedling purchases out of our $2,000, and then if we had used up the $2,000, we would then fall back on that conservation fund because it's more readily accessible to us. And
Yeah.
there's no application process for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're doing nickel and dime stuff up there, it's not worth the effort. If you're
How much is in the conservation fund?
Roughly.
55,000,
And that's from current use?
that's from current use. From the penalty if you withdraw from current use.
And we're getting 1,500 now for the annual?
Yes.
1,500 now.
Yeah.
So Ken, are you suggesting that, what Dick suggested use of the funds was not appropriate, or I guess?
Well, what Dick had suggested is zero funding the conservation fund from the taxpayers and to take it out of the conservation fund,
Right,
which is not the purpose of the conservation fund.
yeah.
And so I pushed back, and Peter Benson and others also basically said, no, wait a minute, the conservation fund was set up for a different purpose. So the selectmen in the end voted to put $1,500 instead of $2,000. And that's roughly what this group was spending.
Yes, it is what we asked.
So at that point, it was highly worth, I think, but I made the point, is no, wait a minute, the fund that the selectmen are giving are for stuff like secretaries and that sort of stuff. And doubly is if you took it out of the conservation fund and burned that up, then you're gonna have to go back to the taxpayers at some time in the future. But it would always be showing that the commission was zero funded, which is not,
Not what you want to show.
that's not what should happen. Because then you'd have no dollars for, if you wanted a legal interpretation or hire a secretary.
Yeah, actually, legal expenses are not charged to the individual.
They're charged to the town.
They're charged to the town,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I was
So
surprised.
that's not a concern.
I was surprised to hear that at whatever, a couple of meetings ago, that they are charged to the town, because I'd been under the impression that they were charged to boards.
Yeah, they're not charged to the board. The only issue there is that if you want access to legal, we've been instructed to request that of the selectmen, and they have to approve before we access.
I'm trying to like everything.
And they're doing that simply because they had a situation, I think, a few years back where somebody ran up a $65,000 bill without really talking to the selectmen about what they were doing and why they were doing it.
And then you have the Baker Fund, which has $63,000 in it, and based on the records that Julie was able to give to me, it was created in 1960, and I think I know why. Document references Article 54, year unknown, indicating town votes to accept Prospect Farm for recreation and forestry. And actually, it turns out that was in 1930, whatever it is that I put here. Then Upton is the town lawyer of 2004, states that this review of will indicates the land will be forever held and used by town for a public park. Then in Article 37 was passed in 1960, states that capital reserve fund may be set up for revenues from sale of timber on Prospect Farm, providing that it is earmarked for some specific purpose, whatever that means. And then in 1962, and I'll get to the dating, importance of the dating, Warrant Article 23 authorizes the selectmen to manage Baker Place timber for highest financial gain with funds placed in general account, providing that at least 10% of such funds shall be used for reforestation of said land. It turns out that the town came into ownership by paying $1 to the, to the son's estate, basically, to have it come over in 1955. And then the town proceeds ahead in 1960 and 61 to hammer. They hammered that place. Well, they logged it super heavily, which is actually contrary to the intent of the will.
Right.
I didn't understand the dollar either. You know, it's a gift, you don't.
No, a lot of times those transactions, and Bill, you may know better than I, but
For consideration.
Yeah.
In order to have a consideration, you offer out $1.
Yeah.
It satisfies all kinds of legal requirements.
Well, it's a gift, you know, but, yeah.
and the paperwork is all in the,
Mm.
but that's, the town takes possession in the end of 55, which is, I couldn't quite figure out when Ezra died, but it was obviously, because sometimes when wills and that get tied up for a year or two before that stuff is finalized, but he obviously died in the 50s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you had like Kelly's and Davis's as selectmen at the time, and they were both loggers.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting history as you go through that as to the positions of who took what, because some of these people I knew. There is a second issue, and I'll get into that when we get into Prospect Farm, but there is the Prospect Farm, and I would advocate that the billing of this is related to the Baker Fund.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes.
And we should be clear with the selectmen that that's where this should be coming from. Because this bill is for $3,000, right?
Yeah.
And the town is allocating us $1,500, so it would beg the question here, where's the other 15 coming from? And it shouldn't come from the Conservation Fund. And it shouldn't come from the Wildcat Fund.
If there's a
Yeah.
specific fund that's intended for the use of managing that farm and its assets, and that sounds like perfect use for it.
And you take the whole 3,000 from that big
Yeah.
fund, right?
Yes.
And that would be appropriate.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah,
So-
the one caveat I'll add to that is, we wanna make sure that we spend our $1,500 in this year. If we're gonna do that, cause,
Right, that will be the reason why it gets taken away. But,
yeah, which I think we could do with the plans for Jackson Falls, I think we have more there pretty easily.
How much did we end up spending on that last year, roughly?
I wanna say like
800,
800-ish.
yeah, 7,
The
8.
sod and the wood chips?
For the sod and the soil.
Well, I would suggest that we not commit, because you do have a Wildcat Fund, which is intended to actually cover those costs.
Yes,
Right, but then
but we
you
would
have
need to apply
You have to
it.
apply for it.
Right.
If it's gonna be a small amount, I would say that would come out of the budget as well as the secretarial fees and our annual.
Well, your sod and loam alone could eat up your $1,500.
Well,
Yes.
it was $650 for a 10 by 10
Yes.
for the sod, and then you get the loam, which, you know, Fred Henry provided for like $65
Right, yeah,
for 3
basically.
yards.
Yeah, no delivery
And
charge.
we could use more, you know,
Mhm.
and then if we do 2 more of those plots, you figure that'd be, what, 1,300 plus the supplies, and you do need peat, you know, a big bale of peat and a couple of bags of compost for each plot, at least.
And that would burn you 1,500.
Yeah, you're right.
So that's why I think,
Yes.
yes.
Because we kept using more and more material from what we had set aside for the other plot.
And I think if we do some signs or something, which I think we talked about, then just take that out of your regular fund, because those are more in the nickel and dime.
I guess that does raise the question, if there is something else we have to pay for, do we have an avenue that we can pull from these? You know, let's just say it's a random other bill that we'd like to pay. We can't take it out of the Baker Trust because it doesn't relate to that. We can't take it out of the Conservation Fund because it doesn't relate to that. You know, just gotta be careful.
Yes.
We know that we can get money for the falls from another way, so.
There wasn't a lot of pushback at the 1,500 actually from the selectmen. It
Yeah.
was just sort of,
Yeah.
okay, let's placate the moment.
Yeah.
Is the way I interpret it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see it, I don't see this as like it's gonna hold us up anywhere, just.
Yeah.
I guess the question would be is, do we need to, at the town meeting, press for additional amount? Or are we good?
Well, what are our annual fees, our annual costs? that are
$200 for
recurring?
the Association of Conservation Commissions. Secretarial fees are roughly, $200 to $300. I'm gonna say $325 an hour for 12 hours. So that's 500 basically, and that's kind of the bookkeeping end of it right there. And then after that, we usually started to pick away at the falls with the remainder of it.
Where's the mowing come out of?
The mowing comes out of the highway budget at this
Yeah,
point in
it
time.
does.
So we don't have to pay for that.
And we used to essentially reserve 1,600 out of the 2004 mowing, which I've been told not to do anymore.
But if you wanted to hire somebody to, for example, to go up and try to get rid of a lot of knotweed along the Wildcat or something.
Right.
Yes, that, I mean, essentially would put us in, I guess, preparing a budget year and asking for it
Yeah.
of the select board and
Yeah, I mean,
having the plan.
if you add up all that together, obviously you can't spend it all, and it all has places to go. There's $132,500, including the $1,500.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Minus the $10,000 that we can't spend from the Wentworth 23,000.
But you can't spend Baker on Wildcat, you can't spend
Right,
Wildcat
right.
on Baker, and so on and so forth.
It's just a,
But that's,
Alright.
that's,
So
And
I'm
just-
I'm content with,
just to go over one more time, the Baker Trust money can be spent where? Only?
I have not gone back through all of these books and records. This is just what was given to me by the town. And it's like, when I went through the Prospect Farm debate, I learned that there was stuff that people said at selectmen meeting that got converted into gospel.
Right.
And it wasn't, but there was never any vote. So
Right.
it's, I can say anything I want.
Right.
And once the moderator said something, but because the moderator said it, doesn't mean that it actually had been
Right.
authorized in previous votes.
Have we moved to talking about Prospect Farm now?
sorry, yeah, I would,
Almost.
yeah, so I would say, should we, I forgot if we motioned last time for how we would pay we just accepted that we would,
Yeah.
We would ask for it to come out of the Baker Fund.
Yeah.
yes, yeah, so I think we need a motion for this $3,000 to come out of the Baker Fund.
I'll make a motion to put $3,000 for forest management's plan, come out of the Baker Trust Fund.
Second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Alright,
And this is just the forest management part of it, it's not the recreation. or the other
correct,
one.
yes.
Now, just to clarify, we don't need to apply for that one?
It's just the Wildcat one.
Yes.
Yeah,
We'll find
couple
out.
things have to happen if we're going to do it. One is you have to have a vote, which we just had, in our conservation commission. And that needs to be reflected in the minutes.
Mhm.
And then the other thing is that the chairperson has to apply for the funds to the trustee of the trust funds to say we've voted to withdraw $2,000 from the Baker Fund to fund blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
And then they will look at that and say, yeah, okay, that makes sense. That looks like what it's supposed to be used for. We'll do that. And then they'll also want an invoice.
Yes, and I know with the falls, the way the Wildcat Trust Fund is set up is the trustees need basically a to-be-built invoice before you accept any work. So we will find out any details about the Baker one, if there's similar details.
And I don't know whether the Baker Fund is under the Board of Selectmen's jurisdiction or under the trustees of the funds. That I don't know.
Well, I will convey our vote to the town office and ask them
Yeah.
to ask.
Sounds good.
When I'm not gonna enter, I'll just say this so I don't forget. When we start thinking about Jackson Falls, if we're gonna have to go through an application process for the Wildcat Trust, does it make sense to think bigger picture than just like sod and soil, like,
Yes.
to like think like, okay, if we're gonna put in an application to the trust, we may as well think like,
What else are you thinking of?
I don't know, I just, spitball ideas and see like, what else would we, what's that?
A playground.
A playground, bridge across.
A plan,
Yes. Yeah. Let's come to Jackson Falls in a second.
Yeah.
Ferris wheel.
Yes.
And unless there's a specific RSA that allows any bequest to the town has to go through the trustee of the trust funds.
All right. So that handles.
See, what I don't know, Bill, on that is whether that one was created through a will or whether it was created by the selectmen, the Baker Fund. That's why I
You mean
said
as a result of
this
funds
timber sale.
that they get from the...
timber sale, yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I'm not certain on that one. Because the trustees of funds, I believe, are mostly for,
Doesn't say anything in the will about it.
yeah.
So-
Yeah.
But she did leave what I could detect, but I didn't have time to chase it all out. So I think she originally left like $500 or something, which created that fund.
Then that would be the fund.
Yeah, and that could well be, and then in which case it may be through the trustees of the funds.
We'll find out.
Yeah.
Excuse me. All right. So that's financial part of it. We have their questionnaire to fill out eventually. But I think before we get to their specific forestry questionnaire, maybe we can discuss Ken's history of Prospect Farm.
By the way, this was well done.
That was amusing to read through.
It was well done.
Very well done.
Good work.
Well, it's kind of interesting because he dies about the time the White Mountain National Forest is being created. And it's obvious that they were she was tying this into,
But still wanted it to be specific to Jackson rather than that, pushing it in the
Yeah.
national forest. What I thought was interesting, based on what I read, and I also asked my wife to read it, we both agreed that even though there might have been additional votes, warrant articles, or other things that may have adjusted how we view or how we view Prospect Farm, the will itself, if this is the applicable section, does not constrain the town from using it other than as a public park, which has all its meanings of being able to use it in any which way it wants. Now, that means it could say restricts how it uses the property to only town residents, but that would be a town choice. That would be warrant articles or things that have happened in, it's not against the use prescribed by the will. And if we're putting together a plan, a recreation plan, or anything we put together can supersede anything that's been out there previously, as long as it gets approved by the town. So, if somebody says we could use snowmobiles and we don't want to use snowmobiles anymore, we can make that part of the program. Or if you want to say it's Jackson residents only, or not Jackson residents only, whatever the heck it is we want to say, we put that in the plan, and if that gets approved, then that would be how it would work going forward. So I think how we decide what we're doing, what we decide is important in terms of putting that forward and making it different from what it has possibly become, either because somebody's voted on it or not voted on it and just made that the way they think it ought to work. So.
Yeah, I mean, the plan could be a guidance document that the town doesn't vote on, in which case it doesn't have, it's just a guidance document. Or we could decide, once we put it together, to ask the town to vote on it, which is what happened in 1972. The Conservation Commission had put together a plan that was actually voted on.
Yeah.
And then, and that was interesting because it said yes on snowmobiling, which begged the question when they voted on the 80s, when they voted snowmobiling out.
Yeah.
But it said, well, the 72 plan said yes on snowmobiling, but because of the conflict between the user groups, that only if another entity stepped in to develop snowmobile trails, and if they were connected to a White Mountain National Forest snowmobile trail system. And there is no White Mountain National Forest snowmobile trail system abutting anywhere in Jackson, with the exception of Town Hall. That is a corridor, and I believe part of that Town Hall may be in Jackson. I'd have to look at a map again. But that was, and then in 80, there was a vote about snowmobiling, and they voted it down, which meant that actually they had the right in 72. They voted it. So the people asking for it actually had the right in 72. But then they came back, and then you had the petition article that then got passed. Later on, to permit snowmobiling, which brought you back to where the 72 one was.
Yeah. And now that's, for some reason people are still.
Well, a lot of people don't go back and look at their prior history.
Yeah.
That's what happens, yeah.
And particularly with that thing where it's flip-flopped a few times, yeah.
So I guess relative to the whole overall picture up there, I would say our goal somewhere in the next year would be to write a document that we bring to the select board to say this is how we think this property is intended to be used. whatever, you know, I'm not going to get into all of the details, but have pretty relatively specific statements that you know about going through the history and what we think should go forward, and make recommendations that we might see fit. One we've talked about before is whether the town wanted to pursue a conservation easement, which may or may not be more binding, or any, you know, anything, or whatever it is that we might think would be the recommendations that would come forward.
I guess my point is that we basically have carte blanche to do, I think, what we think is right.
Yeah.
We're not.
And I don't know whether it makes, I mean, it's interesting how this whole concept came up of Jackson residents only, because Chief Purley has that thing, and it then went back to some of the notes that Julia put together from who said what in selectmen meeting that somehow got converted into gospel by the time it gets posted on. And it's actually before Purley's time, because the document he had is 2014, and he isn't even chief of police then. So somehow that got put together and interpreted to be what was up there, which was also contradictory when we went down to the various elements in there, because there's no, for example, hunting, I can't find anything that says that it was restricted to just the residents of Jackson. I mean, that, and I didn't go through every town.
How convenient.
But as I had to point out to folks is, you know, that, like my son grew up in Jackson, but if you take that interpretation, it means when he comes back, he can't go up there.
Right.
Dick Bennett's kids can't go up there. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. So be careful of, but I don't even think legally the intention was for a private Jackson.
No, and what I understood, Ken, I'm an inheritor of all the fabrications or whatever that people have made around the whole thing. Is that a lot of what was developed was intended to enable them, whomever, to enforce any problem situations they might have had up at the farm. And the best way to do that was to say, oh, you know, you're not a resident.
Right. Yeah. This, if you put the names together, and it seems pretty, it's like,
And in
personal.
1972, which is like, I mean, they've made all kinds of agreements with the Forest Service, with Jackson Ski Touring Foundation. And with the Ski Touring Foundation, it goes back to its inception in 1972. A lot of that cutting of the hubs and that was tied in with it when the Ski Touring Foundation was creating all those trail systems. So I think the selectmen were right in creating those kinds of conditions, because it also fits in with, you know, the will here of, you know, what's the use that's abutting, which was then the Forest Reserve, today the White Mountain National Forest. So there's no contradiction. But do we need to, I mean, there's sort of two ways. One is we could present this to the selectmen and say, this is our interpretation unless you want to change it. The other is to just leave this the way it is. And then when we write the general management plan, we use this as the rationale without trying to force the issue in the public.
I think that's probably the right way to do that.
I agree.
The former?
No, the latter.
Latter.
Yeah.
I concur with you, Bill.
Yeah, I think that's the easiest way to do it, because if it, you know, again,
Right.
ask 100 people, you get 100 different
Right.
views of how this thing ought to be, and the longer you lived in town, the more the more biased you are towards a particular view.
Yeah.
And it
This would bring the same group of people who would have the same comments.
You know, in reality,
Less-
I don't think that there was any group of people outside of like when they were arguing for snowmobiling, that somebody got up and said something at a town meeting.
Yeah.
And even when the moderator says what he says, he doesn't specifically say that it was intended just for Jackson residents. What the moderator said there is any recreational use is valid, which I would argue is not legit.
Right. Yeah.
But that's how the moderator at that time
Right.
was legitimizing snowmobiling.
Right. Yeah.
But he never actually brought up the issue of this was only for town residents.
Right.
It was only that that's the way that article was put forth to be voted on. And he was arguing that in some sense we don't even need to vote on this, because any recreational use, well, we know that that's not true, because then you could argue that ATVs
Right,
or
the monster trucks.
you could use the whole area as a big target range or whatever you wanted to, because they're all recreational uses.
Yeah.
And then that would conflict with the ability of the selectmen to actually manage the place properly.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder if the 2014, I don't know if that was in here, or if you just brought that up in conversation. If that was the meeting that we went to, that was rather fiery. Where a lot of people showed
That was,
up.
it was all about
Yeah,
Prospect
it was
Farm.
Prospect.
I was gonna say, could we put together like a well-crafted thing on e-news or something, just telling people, because I think that was the problem last time, is someone heard through someone else that they watched the minutes and they're like, they're gonna change a bunch of stuff up
Right.
there. And we talked about, we didn't do, I remember afterwards us saying that we didn't do a good enough job, like up front, like front loading it, like, hey, this is
Educating.
coming, this is coming, this is something we're talking about. We're not making any,
Right.
we're not stamping down any laws or anything. We're crafting this plan, and I kind of felt like that, having gotten ahead of it last time would have been helpful, and I don't know if something like that this time would also be helpful.
Well, that's kind of how
Just
I felt when I heard about the Prospect Farm. I just heard like, what? They're changing this to residents only? I'm like, who are these people in town that decided that, you know?
That's
Yeah.
because it was a draft zone, an
And
ordinance.
that wasn't what it was.
That's what
Yeah.
triggered it, yeah.
So there was, right, you just see that one bit of information, you think, well, gosh, I have to go because there's a bunch of townspeople who are trying to change how things are.
I would agree with you, but I think what we should do is develop a draft management, general management plan, make it publicly available, and say we'll have an open discussion about it, and then go to the final, so that people
Well,
get,
and we can do public hearings as
yeah.
well. I mean, I think that should be critical to whatever it is we do, and establish a couple of public hearings.
Yeah.
To get it square. I think we can let the minutes reflect that we're doing this. This meeting, we can let that reflect and say, yeah, we're gonna do this, and then our intention is really not to make major changes, but really
Well,
to ensure that what we're going to do is lay out a plan so that everyone has a good understanding of how the property is to be used, that we get everybody on the same page.
I agree. With that, I think if that's what you're gonna try to do, the information that Ken has brought up, I feel like we need to really figure out what's fact and what isn't, so that we have this thing to say, because that's what's gonna happen is if you can't say, this is the fact, this is how it works, people just come out and say what they want, and you end up just kind of having to back away because we don't have that much power. But if we have it and it's legitimate, we say, we're sorry, but this is what we're working against, we'll try to work with you, instead of just, that's what happened last time. At some point, we're just like, okay.
Well, yeah, last time there was also some changes involved from the if there is a commonly understood use, I think that there was changes involved, which is why some people came
Right.
out.
Well, and the other thing is, we don't need to necessarily totally rely on Ken as being
Yes.
No.
being the person,
That's why I put draft on this, because
If someone feels that, the information's not solid, we can request of the selectman to confer with town council, that he can review this language and say and then if we're not entirely comfortable with, or he doesn't feel that he can make a decision based on his reading of what's there. The thing that I was mentioning at the Jackson Ski Touring, there's something called the Cypre capability that you can actually go and it's a process where you work with the state to have them help you determine what the language said, if it's not entirely clear.
Yes.
And that's if it's disputed. For example, if someone disputed the library here, is it a library or not a library? The old library, is it a library or a library? If there's an issue with things, you can push it up the ladder. If the interpretation that is made locally is not something everybody agrees on.
because the same issue could actually be raised to the Betty Whitney building. She left the chunk of change to the town, $1 million to build the Whitney Fund, for the town of Jackson. Is that to be interpreted that she meant non-residents can use it? Because it's used heavily and people come to performances and stuff there. You know, this is, that kind of interpretation without legitimacy, you know, people that are yelling this may not know how much damage they're doing themselves in the process.
Right, and yet if something is given, and I think this is what I was saying earlier, is something can be given, then the town can choose how they want to use it. I mean, if we said, you know, residents only, and that's how we wanted to use it, and that we voted, that was what it,
Right.
that would be what it
That
would
would be
be.
before, yeah.
Because it was for the, you know, it's given to the town of Jackson, it's, the town can make decisions about how they want to make use of something.
And if the town voted that way, a resident could actually take them to court and say that's not what the intention of the will was, because the will says to be integrated with the
Right.
forest reserve.
Right.
Right.
I mean, that's what I would do if I was,
Then you start going up the ladder
Right.
with the other interpretations, but it's something we need to get there.
No.
No,
I think based on what we see here, and I think what most people feel, I don't know.
I don't think
Yeah.
it even occurred to people, really.
yeah, you know, but you just, it's like you should.
well, I think as I say, it originated where Chief Pearlie was doing what he was asked to do. He looked on his bulletin board, which was made up of, you know, that, so he wrote the ordinance based on that. And I know in the conversation I did have with him, he was sort of interpreting that when it was given to the inhabitants of Jackson, that also de facto meant it was only for the,
Yeah, no, and I think
and that part I don't believe, I don't
Yeah.
subscribe.
I think his predecessor may have been the one who.
Yeah, whatever it was, but yeah.
Just to circle back around real quick, the reason I had said e-news was because the last time in 2014, when people showed up really mad, we'd been talking about it in the minutes for a long time, but no one had read the minutes. So that was the only reason why I was looking for like a wider net to cast to
Yeah.
inform more people
Right,
that this is
right.
something we're thinking about doing.
Yeah,
Because I remember they showed up and people were upset, and we said, well, we've been talking about this for months and months and
Right.
months. And, you know, they haven't read the minutes, and I don't blame them for not reading the minutes.
that's true.
At some point, though, that's their responsibility.
Well, maybe we could develop a plan, but make it a synopsis and put it on either, something,
Yeah.
something easy to read.
We actually put it at the last meeting, it's in your meeting minutes here at the very tail end, that we said we were gonna develop a recreation management plan.
Yeah.
Truncated. By the way, I hate to reopen, but the meeting minutes say that Dick reminds the Conservation Commission that they have 70,000 in the account. I believe that Dick said it was 50-something, and that's what is in the account. So I don't know where this 70K number, but she may have transcribed it properly.
Or she may have added up the wildcat and the conservation. plan.
No, she wouldn't have, because she was
I
just.
think that was the number he used.
Is it?
I remember that number.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the number I recall, so when I read it, it didn't seem out of place.
Not that's necessarily accurate.
Yeah, but it
Yeah.
would reflect.
But Dick is
He said
the,
something like,
Yeah,
He's our liaison.
yeah, but Dick is the selectman's representative on this board.
Right.
So essentially, he is like any other board member, if I understand.
no, he's not.
He's not, okay.
No, in this particular board, he is a liaison.
He's liaison, okay.
Unlike the planning board where the selectman representative is an actual voting member, he is not a voting member. He is simply a liaison.
Yeah, he was a member for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. And
So
I'm sure
we
everybody's
appreciate
there
being
still.
here and all
But
that.
the meeting minutes reflect to the public that there's 70K there, which is not.
Well, we could, I don't know how you, I mean, if it's what he said, though, it is what he said.
It's what he said, you can't
I
change
agree
what he
with you.
said.
It'll be shown in this week's meeting or this month's meeting.
Right, that we say it's 50-something.
So I was wondering if perhaps Ken and two others would want to form a subcommittee to start this work so that we have something going on in between meetings, so that we're not relying on one individual to be doing all this homework in between monthly meetings.
No, step up.
I mean, any third?
This is to look at the management plan, or? but
Yeah, the overall management plan. And I guess I would say we should start out with defining what it is we want to do, what our goals are by the end of the year, and like kind of the steps along the way, just to kind of lay out that blueprint.
I'll volunteer for that.
Okay, great. So if the three of you kind of get together, I guess, and there's, right, if I'm understanding correctly, 3 is okay. It's not a quorum.
Right.
So you can meet as you fit.
3 is maximum.
Um,
I was gonna ask the same question.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, so we could definitely have more people and just post them in the meeting, that's easy to do also, that it could become an open planning session. And I would say for the next, to me, I mean, I guess you guys would define what it is we would want to know, but the resources we have, we want to know, so I know there are, the Conservation Association, as well as a lot of other groups out there will help people develop management plans. So identifying those resources that we might have, and then starting more of the fact finding of what are the facts, what are actually voted on things, what are the will, and maybe a document also that kind of states what we collectively as a board think is how we are currently managing the plan, because we don't even have that written right now in those. So I think that could be a good starting point of, this is what we, the 7 minds, think Prospect Farm is intended for and how we have been managing it as an advisory board to the town, and kind of go from there as to what the future management, if, see if we wanted to diverge or not. Does that sound good? Great. All right.
I mean, because what I can try to do is, I mean, there's a gazillion recreation management plans. It's not like we're starting with,
Yeah.
how do we invent a template? There's a lot of good templates out there. But I was going to suggest that what we do is, and I'll just throw this out quick and people can email other suggestions, but, you put down like the expected recreational uses up there, like ATV, hunting, snowmobiling, cross-country skiing, hiking, camping, and then parallel that with whatever restrictions have already been voted into place, so that if you're dealing with a change to something that is legally binding versus like ATVs, the decisions have been made,
Right.
I think for the right reasons, because you get a lot of wet soils up there just as a starter. But e-bikes would be,
Right.
and there we might want to take a look at where the Forest Service is on that.
Drones,
Yeah.
drone
Yes.
use.
And I would
Drone use, those kinds of things, and come up with kind of a master list of what we can best envision would be the recreational uses, and then we can start to sort out where are the conflicts between various recreational uses.
And I guess in my mind, as a accepting input part of the process, perhaps that kind of level where we are going for additional input from other essentially townspeople
Yep.
would be to kind of, if the 3 of you could draft something that's more of like the executive summary of the current conditions as we know them, rather than getting into all the if this, if that's,
Right, we want something to say that this is what we feel we currently have going on.
yeah, because I definitely can see different ways forward, but if we
Yeah.
have that statement, kind of that executive summary of how we see things now, what the actual real legal background is, and if we need help on developing that legal background. And then at that point in time, once we have those 2 documents, maybe that is a potential point to look for that wider input, to be like, hey, this is our understanding legally and word of mouth. Where do we want to go from here? And I think obviously the ultimate pusher was whether we would really want to go back to town meeting next year to advocate anything that the chief was asked to do this year. I think that's a very particular side part of this process that maybe to us is a small goal, but might be important.
Yeah, my understanding of the chief right now is basically said is, you guys do what you need to do.
Yeah.
As opposed to he feels like,
Yeah.
I don't know, Bill, whether you got the same feedback or not, but that was,
Because I could also see that, no, sorry, Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, I haven't talked to the chief at all, so I haven't heard anything on that, but, yeah.
I think that would also be a great point to get feedback from the select board on how granular of a management plan they want to have. Which I think, the more detailed the better. Kind of for Jackson Falls, we do have guiding documents written by basically outside experts along the
Yeah.
way, so we're kind of making our own here. And kind of something that popped into my mind, I guess in the legal background bit, or in the history bit, our relationship with the Forest Service and the federally designated Wild and Scenic River. I know it's not directly abutting any part of the Wild and Scenic. I don't believe town land is directly abutting it. I believe Forest Service land is in between it. But I know the Wild and Scenic River might impact what we can do on part of the property up there. So those are 2 additional considerations. Would be either the Wild and Scenic designation or whatever existing agreements the town has with the Forest Service for access to national forest land, specifically for logging, but in general across town property. Because I have to imagine that when the Forest Service built the parking lot on town property, it wasn't just a handshake between the town and the Forest Service. So
I don't think so
it could have been.
either.
I assume there's some document out there that says the town will allow you to build a parking lot on our town property in return for, whatever
Yeah.
the.
There are documents, I didn't
It
have
just
enough
took
time.
years and years. I just remember it dragged on. And I think that's why it kind of got watered down.
Then,
Well,
Yeah.
there was the Fan Brook cut. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. I mean, that's my understanding, is it was that Forest Service cut on Van Brook. Because my memory on the board is that the parking lot existed, and suddenly everyone was like, hey, they finally made it, and they didn't really tell us about it. But
Right.
it was as it was supposed to be years ago.
Yeah, yeah. It
There was,
just never-
yeah.
It was
Anyway.
supposed to happen and never.
There's also not only the Forest Service, but there's also Frank Lyons project, and it turns out that he actually had proposed to develop his 100 acres.
Oh, the private trunk.
Yeah.
Yeah, wasn't he gonna do it?
Well, the best that I can figure out is then there was a cat fight about the deed on the right of way. And I stumbled on this late, so I haven't had a chance to fully, but the best that I can understand is it then went to Superior Court. And the town, it turns out that when Baker bought the property, there was the 100 acres that was subdivided off the original. This property was actually Pingree way back, the Pingree of owned millions of acres in, the old Pingree heirs from the 1800s
Wow.
in Maine. They owned well over 1 million acres, but that was part of their holding here, and then it got subdivided and chunked off as you go down through the record. So Baker ends up buying their 500, which it turns out I think is more like 450, and then there's the 100 acres that Carter buys that then Lyons owns partial share that then comes into full ownership, and it gets kind of interesting because he was the chief of the fire department at that time. And he proposed to sell off hunting cabin lots up there. And the selectmen said, no, you can't, you don't have a right of way. And it turns out that historically, when they logged through there before, they were paying for the right of way to get in to log. So he has a right of access, which is different than a guaranteed right of way. He takes it to Superior Court, and then at the last minute, I think, and I need a lawyer to look at this because I got lost in all the Latin stuff, but it looks like he pulled the plug on the Superior Court decision at the last minute. And that was yeah, which would be indicative that he realized he was going to lose the case, so he pulled the
He was
plug.
really, yeah.
But there was a big cat fight, and the selectmen were pretty adamant that no, you do not have a right of
And
way.
what year was that, Ken?
It was resolved in the courts in the 90s.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't resolved.
Right. I just remember that being I remember hearing about that a lot
Yeah,
in the 90s, just that there was always this 100-acre piece that could, at some point.
but it's something that I don't know whether, Lions would have any interest in selling and pending on or not, but I think it's something that at some point we ought to investigate.
Maybe a loose end, yeah.
But when you look at recreational uses and forest management, because right now it's just sitting there as a sore point for both the Forest Service as well as for the
Yeah.
Prospect Farm, but
Great.
Yeah.
$132,000 right here.
it's not in current use and it is appraised for $57,000,
Right.
which tells me that he does not have, if you're being appraised at $57,000 for 100 acres and you had right of way to it, it's worth more than $57,000.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Look, yeah. Things I didn't know. Yeah.
I didn't know that till I was reading through this other record.
Yeah, I didn't know he went to court and lost. I just.
Well, no, he didn't go to court, he didn't lose because
Right. He.
All right. Thank you guys, three of you. And I guess maybe part of what you should start too would be the goals. If, as you're doing your research, there becomes obvious outcomes of where we're headed, we should
Mhm.
figure out what the goals are beyond just writing down what has never been written before and making sure it's legal.
Did the state just pass an e-bike law, or was that National Forest? Or no, maybe National Park. One of the three just kind of tweaked their rules on e-bikes.
right, well, of course, with this administration, you'd be allowed to use a bulldozer.
Right. Needs to be diesel.
I think where they're headed, and I don't know what the final resolution is, there's different kinds of e-bikes.
Yeah.
And, if you're greater than 20 miles an hour, it's different. And if it's pedal assisted, which is different than if you can just throttle control it. And they've started to differentiate between those.
Okay, yeah.
Because you have all three.
I've got to look into it, because I know the people that
Can I
have them.
add one further thing to the 3 years subcommittee?
Yes.
I guess would be the landowner goal assessment form,
Because we're not gonna get it done.
because we might not get it done tonight unless the broader group, I mean, I was looking at it briefly in it. So this is what forest land improvement, presumably we filled this out before, but it's basically the, like, what is your property, who's owning it, what are your intentions, what do you want to do with it? I mean, some of the things I would assume are straightforward, but I guess with the kind of our current understanding of the current management priorities, this.
That
we part
was
of the
craft
discussion.
that executive summary probably.
Yes, so some of the specific questions are like high level, no importance to income, recreation, beauty, different particular types of recreation.
Tom, could you, because the first that I've seen of it was, when you had a hard copy here. Do you have an electronic copy?
Yeah, we got it at the end of last week that I can send to you.
Yeah, I was gonna
It's a-
suggest that you email that to all of us and we
Yes.
take it up at the next meeting because
Sure.
and otherwise we would just,
Yeah, we're gonna have different.
we'd
points.
react and talk for hours on end.
Yes,
But
but maybe you can guide the discussion of it.
And that's just me.
Right, I was gonna say.
Yeah. Yes.
because there's also,
Schedule.
one other thing when I just skimmed through this that we ought to take into consideration is there was a cat fight between the Conservation Commission and the town about having a stump dump up there.
Yes.
And it turns out that the stump dump is the source of our invasives.
Yes.
It's what, I'm sorry?
It's the source of our invasives, not weed.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
And there's no reason to have a stump dump up there,
Yes.
Well,
other than,
prior selectmen, but as we know, selectmen change, and so I think one of the things that, if we want that to be looked at, these guys coming out and authenticating that that's an
Right.
issue is probably better than us pontificating.
Right, right.
Yes.
But there is a problem. I mean, I know like when you do a lot of projects on the Forest Service now and that, you can't even bring soil or seed in
Yeah.
unless you can guarantee that it's free of this. And this is a classic case of how you move invasives into where it shouldn't be.
Right.
Yes.
And yet there is an RSA that says the town should have a stump dump.
Is that true?
I
feel like that's one of those things that I've heard both ways.
I have not chased it out. That's just part of, but there was a major cat fight between the Conservation Commission and the selectmen overruled them at that point and said, no, you're gonna have a stump dump there, amen.
Yeah.
This is prior selectmen, not.
Yeah.
But now that we know that it's a problem,
Yes.
I think the forest management plan, and I think that's some of the stuff that we should look at as well. When we look through that.
Yes. Yeah, I'll send it to everyone. I'll also ask the timeline in which they want it back.
Mhm.
I don't remember if the email specified that. To see if, because if they need it sooner than a month, we can call another public meeting and fill it out and send it back to them faster the first of next month.
I think we just tell them we're gonna take it up in the March meeting, because we just
Yeah.
got it.
Yeah, I think he had I read something, they had a
Yeah.
timeline
Yeah.
of what.
I didn't think I brought it, but I'm not referring to it.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, yeah, so on this, he has a timeline of when they feel like their field work to incur in late spring.
Okay.
Plan and map to be delivered June 30th.
I think we just,
Yeah, next meeting's perfect then.
yeah.
Okay. Anything else for Prospect Farm?
I have one quick thing for Prospect Farm. Little thing, peanuts. Is that the last time I was up there, which was last week, it's the second or third time I've noticed that I think the sign at the corner, like go up Wildcat Valley Trail and then Hall's Ledge to the left, right?
At the very top?
Yeah, at the very top of the groomed area, right? I mean, it still goes like a little grooms, then goes back up this way over to Beth Hendricks.
Yeah.
So yeah, at that Beth Hendricks Hall's Ledge, I'm pretty sure that the sign is missing, and that's a town sign.
Yeah, it's.
So I was thinking about that because I think I noticed it maybe last year, and then I checked the last time I was up there, which was last week, like the end of last week, like Friday or Saturday, and it's not there anymore. And I think last year we said we didn't care because there was a ski touring had put a map
You
right
are
there. Yeah, you are here map there, but it's not there this year. And I thought in summer those are gone. I'd be able to take them out in summer too.
No, I suspect, and I mean, somebody could have taken it off, but the old maps are now outdated.
Oh, right.
Because the ski touring because of the history of trails were getting so convoluted, so
Right.
the trail maps have been changed in the names in some of those. So the original map from which that was based from is now not valid anymore. And the Ski Touring Foundation is trying to catch up also in the sign making with that.
Gotcha.
But it does not affect the names.
Yeah.
It does affect some of the names in Prospect Farm, but not those.
Anyway, so we just don't like that sign's gone. I don't
Yeah,
like
there's
it.
nothing
But
there now.
there used to be a town sign there that said
I
because
thought
you had George or someone made him.
I thought we did put a town sign there because there was a ski touring one that said view to the left, basically. Whatever the details were.
We had one that just said it was just originally there was just an arrow that had left and it was like it was just a yellow arrow.
Yeah.
Yellow left, and then we had a town one there that said
Okay.
Hall's Ledge left.
Yeah.
Should look under the snow for the post then.
It probably fell. I mean, I don't know.
But yeah, all right,
But
we
it probably
can-
just fell. in the
either
snow,
way.
you know.
Replace the sign.
But just so I know.
All right, good to know. Well, we,
Because it doesn't matter as much in the winter because you can kind of figure it out. But in the summer, if you're walking up there, you'd have no idea
Yeah,
that's how you get to Hall's Ledge.
well, I mean, even right now, there's a lot of snow, and the way the grooming is, you would just you follow the path that more people have gone, which is going to Beth Hendrick.
Yeah.
You probably wouldn't even go down the Hall's Ledge.
Yeah.
So it is nice to have a sign when you get to the height of land there.
Mhm.
Well, almost height of land.
all right, Jackson Falls. We talked about basically, well, I guess the money part of it we discussed a little bit, but it seems like the plan would still be this year for putting sod in, or the sod mats. I forgot the timeline from last year for ordering them and everything.
I think we ordered them in April last year,
Okay. So
and
we've
then
got
they'll get
some.
them to us as early as we're ready for them.
Okay.
So it's up to us to be, you have to get the sod, the soil and the amendments, and then tell them to come.
Okay, so we don't need to do anything now. I guess
Well, no, but we would have to put in to get the funds from the,
if we wanted to, yes, increase that 1,500. So I guess right now I had understood.
I think we almost have to, because if we're spending a couple $100 on the Conservation Commission and we're spending over 500 right off, your bill for that is well over what's going to be allocated right now, unless you went in
Yeah.
and asked for the budget to be amended. And if I'm correct,
I mean, my understanding of what was asked of us in our budget was not anything that is even small improvements like this, we not ask for from the taxpayers while there are other funds. So basically, I feel like we have been asked to use up that $1,500, or I thought it would have said 2,000, but anyway. And then after that, go to our other three sources of funding. So I guess I feel like we've been told not to ask for more money
Well, when
for projects.
we want to go to the Wildcat Fund first for the
Yes.
street project, and then the little stuff that comes along, take from the 1,500.
I guess that would be the question to the board, is whether we want to apply to the Wildcat Fund for money and how much.
I would suggest something a little bit more proactive, and that is to come up with approximately what we think for the
Exactly.
Wildcat, and go to the fund with, I think
Yeah.
this was mentioned prior with, saying that we want to withdraw up to
Yes.
from that fund, because if you look at the sod, and it's around 1,300, but it may be less, because some of that was for shipping and handling costs, which doesn't change whether we buy one. I think we bought
It
one,
gets cheaper if you buy more
Yeah.
than two.
More
The
than-
price per.
because we just bought one
Per
pallet.
pallet, we only brought one pallet, which is a 10 by 10 square. But if you buy, I think more than two, the price goes down for the 10 by 10.
Mhm.
Not sure how much, and that was last year.
And I don't think we want to buy more than 3 max.
It's hard, yeah, it's hard work to move this. It's the soil, it's not so much the sod, it's the soil.
Yeah.
Having to move that stuff.
And that's why, and at some point, we may want to hire somebody to do some of that, because I don't.
It's a lot of wheelbarrowing.
I have no time.
I said it's a lot of wheelbarrowing.
Yeah, it's just, if you don't have the volunteers that can do it when it needs to be done, then it just lingers.
Project doesn't go enough.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do we need to figure out how to spend that $1,500? Like, just kind of,
Yes.
we already know where 500 of it goes, maybe, just so we're not finding ourselves ourselves short because we
Yes.
Try to
I would
spend
keep
it.
your remaining 1,000 clear right now and not worry about
Spending it.
spending it.
Yeah.
Because if we want to take some money to help us with a recreation plan, you may want to use some money there.
Right, we could easily use it.
Yeah.
And that's why I think you want to take the Wildcat out of Wildcat, otherwise you've gone well above and beyond what was appropriated to the commission.
Great. Would you mind coming up with a budget for the next meeting, a rough one?
Budgets for the sod.
Yes. So that we could then take
Yeah.
that and make that our
How
All
many-
application.
things.
How many paths do you think we want to do?
2.
I think that's
There's not that
reasonable.
many areas.
Well, it depends upon if you want to make islands or if you want to start trying to make things contiguous.
Yeah,
Because, you know, there's one area that we're gonna do, I think 2 is reasonable, but just because it's a lot of work, unless we're gonna hire people.
Yes, and I guess you could probably do it 2 ways. If the soil moving is the hard part, either do it volunteer based or hiring someone. And have the 2 different numbers.
When you apply for that, is there a time frame under which that money has to be spent?
I don't remember. I mean, last time we basically did the application through the winter. Bill might remember better than I, since, but the application went through the winter and then we spent it that spring.
Gotcha.
Should we put the signs under there too then? Signs that I have put down.
Yes.
I think it makes sense. And then I think the other thing is you can buy these short garden stakes that are about this tall.
Right?
Um,
We had those last year, the green ones. Is that what
Did-
you're talking about, just the?
Yeah,
maple ones?
but, you know, for passive trail management on some of the more heavily where they're moving off where you don't, and then you just have, you know, whether it's
Yeah, like
Yeah,
plastic
some sort of
chain.
chain.
plastic, but something that's quality, you know,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
aesthetically, you know, it's not a high barrier, so it
Right.
doesn't, and so it's not sticking out
Yeah.
big visual way, but,
Keeps
Like
honest
foot-
people
foot and a
honest.
half.
You can't keep fools and
Foot and a
do what
half
they
from the
want to
ground?
What's that?
You're saying a foot and a half type of thing from the ground? Is that what-
yeah, I mean,
A little higher.
the Jackson Ski Touring Foundation bought a bunch for the race, and they're about this tall. Whether they're a foot and a half, 2 feet.
Yeah.
They're in that ballpark. And, you know, we probably want to dip them in some sort of preservative so that, you know, they don't rot out on you in the first year if you're gonna do it.
What are they made out of that you're thinking?
I don't, that's what I'm not certain on. I mean, if it,
Yeah.
I don't think there's cedar. If there was cedar, then they kind of,
So you're thinking stakes?
yeah. And then some sort of chaining or something that aesthetically,
You got your work cut out for you.
I like this, this is fun.
and I don't know how many linear feet, but I would just put a ballpark number in there.
But I was thinking contiguous, see if we can't add on to what we did last year, as opposed to making islands. Just do
Yeah,
one.
I'd want to walk it again before I decide.
Yeah.
I really would. Because some of those areas, it doesn't make sense to put because the high water is going to take it away.
Yeah, so we want to see how high it comes up this time, in the spring.
Mhm. Great. All right. That sounds great. Anything for Grayson?
A lot.
Yeah.
No.
It's still there. People snowshoe it.
It's still not there.
Yeah, it's still not there.
Such a good joke. It's still not there.
Well, no way.
Yeah. Conservation easements, nothing current. We did get, for wetlands, nothing for action, but a copy of a letter that Stephen Dinsmore did not complete his wetlands notification correctly. It needs to do it correctly. If I'm reading that word.
Can I add a new one?
Yes.
I had a neighbor come up to me last week, and she said, she remarked, or she was upset about the amount of dog feces that are on the road. And she's a medical doctor, and she said it's an issue with E. coli. And she talked to a few other people up the road, and they're dog walkers, and they said that it's the short-term rental people that just let their dogs poop and leave it. So what she does, and the reason why I bring this up is because all that stuff is running downhill into the Wildcat. So and she mentioned it's a health risk for people's water wells, but also water running down. She said not even throwing it into the woods is a good idea because it's all going to still end up in the water supply. And she said the solution that they have where she lives in southern New Hampshire is they have pretty stiff fines for not picking up your pet waste. I thought I'd just put it out there and just see what people know.
We have a big problem with it at the Rockwell Sanctuary.
Mhm.
And that
Big
is,
time.
people Their dogs poop all over that sanctuary, left and right,
It's insane.
constantly.
So would you be in favor of something that basically said $1,000 fine for not picking up your pet waste? Now, I asked her what's better to, fling the stuff into the woods or to put it into a plastic bag that goes into a landfill. And she said, well, E. coli can give you cancer, so she said, put it in the landfill.
Well, I think some of her facts there may be a little stretched, but that's beside the point. Yeah,
Talking to a medical doctor, what can I say?
E. coli and cancer.
That's what she said.
Yeah, well,
I was
the dog
surprised.
waste has been out of control. Even at Prospect, there was a time at Prospect I just stopped going because I realized that every time if you're walking in that parking lot, you're basically just
In the
tracking
poop.
dog feces all over you.
They have posted.
Yeah, it's helped too.
It's made quite a difference.
It has made a difference. But yeah, same thing at the Rockwell.
That's what we've talked about, posting at the Rockwell and maybe putting like one of those like dog bag dispenser things.
Yeah, I mean, I think it
We've talked
helps.
about that.
You could, I forgot if it was an Eagle Scout.
They did it at the falls.
I did it at the Falls and a couple other spots.
Yeah.
Perhaps they could be to
But is there any way
Increase.
that we as a conservation commission, if we come to that conclusion, make a recommendation to?
We can make
to
a
select board?
recommendation to the select board. But the select board is the only place where they can do
What
anything
about-
about it.
What about putting out a e-news that just like a notifier, like heads up to people about dog waste just as a whole?
There's a whole bunch of issues like this.
It's
Like,
short-term rentals.
one of the major forms of mortality for birds is people let their cats out.
That's why my
And
cats are indoor only.
I think it's like the vote on climate change. I think if we're going to get into this, we ought to take a step back and do our homework really well. But domestic cats that are allowed outside are one of the highest causes of bird mortality.
Mhm.
I know, it's like 3 billion birds
Yeah.
lost to cat
But
predation.
these are worthwhile things. It's a question of how many we can do at once. And
Mhm.
Well, one,
I think with dogs like that and with cats, we may want to look at those, but I would suggest that with a finite amount of time, we do the Prospect Farm management plans and those, because all of these are hot button issues and you'd probably want to control how many you're dealing with at once. That's my suggestion.
And the fact is that even though we're an advisory board, our purpose is to be an advisory board for use of land management.
well,
And
that's why I was saying,
use of land management has nothing to do with poop.
it has to do
Sure
with
it
the
does.
scenic, with
Well,
the-
no, it does not. I'm sorry. That has everything to do with being a select person and deciding whether or not you want to manage the town and have certain things required. That's their job. That's their job, not the Conservation Commission. Conservation Commission's responsibility, read it. Read to see what it is.
I just took your sentence that you said, your first sentence, that you
Pardon?
said the conservation's job is management of,
Is to advise on land management.
well,
and
wouldn't
you'd
that
be
the falls?
advising.
That's not
Does-
land management. How dogs pooping is not land management.
Doesn't it roll down, doesn't it roll
keep-
downhill
how
into
is
the
it
falls?
not?
We could be a resource, I think.
How is that
To
not
do this, if we
helping
wanted
to
to.
man? I'm not saying that we have to. I'm just trying to figure out how is that not helping someone to either.
I'm not saying it doesn't help, that's not the point. There's a lot of
Well,
things
we're
we could do.
advising.
We could
We'd be
also, we could
advising.
advise people not to smoke.
But that's who cares?
That,
That's not the
yeah,
point.
that makes a difference in land management because people put butts down on the ground and then you have to pick up the butts.
Yeah, but
Come
Bill,
on, you can
Bill,
come
Bill,
up with
Bill,
100
Bill,
people
can I
on a
interrupt for a
tree.
second? Hold on.
Excuse me, folks.
Because people
That's
drinking
just
at the
ridiculous.
falls causes trouble for glass management.
I think
Come
we
on,
wandered
you
into
can do
some
a
steep
thousand
You win,
things.
you win, Bill.
There-
Enough said.
What is your job? Figure out what your job is and do it. And then not do the job that you're not supposed to do.
I'm not.
That's my point. All these are valid social issues and they affect people and they affect how you enjoy your property. But they're not the
Human or
appropriate
dog
places.
waste on property that we manage, as I see it in the Conservation Commission. If there was so much waste that you couldn't walk, would we still say, well, that's not our, we're not gonna recommend
Prohibit
anything?
dogs.
Just remember one thing, is most of that dog shitting is happening in the parking lot in the first 100 yards. That's not town property. That's somebody else's property. It's Valentine's property.
Well, yeah,
Right.
and
But, I mean,
Yeah.
I guess I will say,
It's just information, just inform people of a situation, not saying, this is what you need to do and not do. I'm just saying,
I don't disagree that you want.
Then don't disagree.
I don't disagree that you want to
Just
say.
leave it there.
I'm not saying that. But to try to, what you want to do is you want to say, okay, you want to get folks in
Absolutely.
town, you want to get the select board to do something to say, for example, Pam's point, you want to push on the select board to make a decision around fines and to say.
no,
that's the-
I'm not. My point was, can we advise a selectman or someone to put out an email saying, hey, just so you know, there's been a lot of animal waste in
We
public
could,
areas
from
that
our
we use.
past
Just a
experience,
recommendation,
I
not
think we would want the
doing
select
anything.
board to ask us further advice on new issues. You know, I guess I'll go back to history of the public versus private parking up at the falls. You know, very clearly, I think we were told not to offer advice when we were not asked to on certain issues. So I think we could bring it up with the select board and have them come and ask us as our expert opinion if they thought it was needed and new things. I don't know if, you know, I think in the past also cutting on private property. And I remember there was a case, I think Larry was the chair, you know, someone had clear cut their property, had run down onto the neighbor property, and
Oh, right, yeah.
kind of an example of land use management that the Conservation Commission had some expertise in, and the town kind of said, no, we're not getting into whether or not you clear
We've been
cut.
asked very specifically not to walk in those waters.
But-
Okay, and you know, you can choose what you want to
Advisor.
do.
Yeah, well, we could if we, you know.
I mean,
if we
you can
asked.
choose what you want to do, you can say what you want, but we're an advisory board, and an advisory board, the value of an advisory board is the level at which you provide good advice.
Well,
Your point would be what?
let's leave it for now, guys, if you don't mind.
Well, if you're
Somebody
stepping in,
in our
if you're stepping
town,
in the
some
wrong
people
poop.
in our, some people in our town complained about animal waste at Prospect Farm.
And they should be going to the select board to do that, yes.
So they asked one of us, or several of us, and they just simply, we're gonna ask the selectmen if they would possibly do something about it.
Pam, you had asked about Ten Mountain and what we were doing, and one of the things that we were going to try and work on is just more education.
Yeah,
Found that education goes a little farther than enforcement, at least with our
right,
kind of the properties we manage. So we're gonna work on that because it is kind of gross up at
yeah.
Rockwell Sanctuary.
Cool. So are you guys doing any research?
It's usually in the first 100 yards.
Yeah, oh, I was
Because
just
the dogs are
yeah,
excited.
yeah.
But it's,
That what's in the first?
Rockwell's beyond the first 100 yards.
Yeah.
The ski jump is the same.
The animal waste up there is,
Dogs get out of the car, they're excited, they smell of the dogs.
Thanks, everyone. Does anyone like to go home?
Yes.
yes.
Does anyone want to vote to, or move?
Move.
Anyone second? All in favor of ending the meeting? Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm sure.